Thank you, Chairman, and I thank the witnesses today for appearing on this extremely important topic. Mr. Flattery, you and your wife have become way more involved in this issue than you probably ever hoped to since the loss of your son. You'd mentioned a couple of times here to Mr. Conley and in your opening statement about the ease of access of opioids, specifically OxyContin. Can you explain a little further what your understanding is of why these are so easy to get and why they're so inexpensive?
Well, I'll first start with the basic essence of the anatomy of this epidemic. This was, as Mr. Humphrey indicated, this wasn't started by drug dealers who had built a business model around providing illicit drugs. This had its origins in the medical community. I believe you are a medical practitioner yourself and understand that. In an attempt to be compassionate in the treating of pain, American physicians use their prescription pad. American physicians also have a deficiency in prior training on proper pain management and addiction management. There isn't even a whole discipline built yet around addiction management in medical schools. So in an attempt to provide compassionate care, American physicians are implicated in the overuse of opioid drugs for all manner of pain conditions for which they were never intended. They started out as a drug that was to address terminal cancer pain and a recovery from acute injuries. And it drifted into the use of opioid drugs for migraines, arthritis, indiscriminate lower back pain, in the dental community for wisdom tooth extraction. And they not only were being overprescribed, they were being prescribed in quantities that were completely unnecessary for the treatment of an acute condition. And as Mr. Bond indicated, long-term use of opioid drugs lead to addiction. Now, you asked the question about why so ubiquitous, I guess, and the answer is, in 2013, we hit the peak year in the US with over 259 million prescriptions. That's a number in the billions of individual doses. And those drugs are flooding communities and workplaces, and they're just widely available, and they're available for potential misuse. Okay. And so they're available at low cost on the street.
Okay. Mr. Baum, is there currently any legal requirement for prescribers, physicians, nurse practitioners to fully educate their patients on not only the harms, addictive properties of these medications, but also to educate them on the dangers and illegality of sharing these medications with other people?
Thank you for the question. There is no requirement for mandatory prescriber education, and frankly, I'm very concerned about that. I know in the previous administration there was discussion about increasing voluntary prescriber education, but looking at the progress, I don't think it's been nearly enough, and I think it's something that we ought to talk about, making it mandatory to make sure at least those prescribers that are putting these very, very powerful drugs in the hands of our citizens spend a few hours learning about the risks and about addiction, I think would be important, and it's something that we should talk about.
I think it's, probably more than something we should talk about. As a former physician and current holder of a DEA license, I know that I would make it a point to educate my patients on the power of these drugs. But also, I think there's responsibility among the patients to know that it should be illegal to share these drugs. I have a license, went to medical school to prescribe them, but patients often will just share it with family and friends, thinking that's okay. That should be a crime, and it probably is, but it's not enforced. And if one of the problems is overprescribing, that needs to be stopped. And physicians and medical students and all prescribers should be educated in medical school on this issue. Because of the scope of this problem, the time is ripe to do that. But also, I think that it is a patient's responsibility to properly handle these medications, and there should be laws and documents that a patient should sign when they pick up this prescription, either from the pharmacy or when physicians prescribe it. Would you be willing to look at that as an option?
Yeah, I'm absolutely willing to look at it, but I really think the major responsibility is with the prescribers. When you have an injured kid that you're taking to the doctor, and the doctor gives you your prescription to take pills for 30 days or 60 days, and you get your bottle of pills with the directions, the tendency is to follow the directions. And now we're putting it on parents to ask the doctor, hey, does my kid really need to take this for 30 days for a wisdom tooth extraction? And I think it should be the other way. The doctors are the experts. They're the one in the white coats. They're the ones with the responsibility to think about the powerful medications they're putting in the hands of our citizens.
And I'll promise you that the vast majority of all doctors feel the same way. They don't want to harm patients with these medications. They don't want to prescribe irresponsibly. There are always bad actors, and that's who we need to focus on. I think that that door swings both ways. Physicians definitely should take the brunt of the responsibility. Also think that law enforcement should focus on people who share or sell these medications, because as a physician, that was always a concern of mine. If I was treating someone with chronic pain or even cancer, you just assume that those people are taking the prescriptions properly. That's not always the case, and I have all kinds of stories where I can tell I found out people were being put in very vulnerable situations by family members to get these prescriptions so they could go out and sell them, and so they were forced to lie to me. I didn't know I was doing the wrong thing, and I know other physicians are in the same situation where they get tricked or duped into thinking people have critical problems or illnesses. And so I do think the enforcement side of that needs to be ramped up as well. But there's a dual responsibility, and the bottom line is we have a huge number of people dying every year, and it's not time to think about what we should do. We should be doing it, and I'm happy to work with you further on this issue. And thanks to the chairman for giving me the additional time. I yield back.
Gentleman from Tennessee yields.